in immersive technologies in the V&A, and he's going to do a more full introduction of himself, but I'll pass over to you. Thank you so much for coming.
Hello everybody. So I'm Patrick Morgan. I've worked in art, design, fashion for about 20 years. I guess my latest projects have been working with the V&A. I worked for Tom Ford for about 7 years. I worked for Dior for about 5 years. So I've worked in a lot of luxury fashion. So I guess there's that side. Then I went back and did my MA in 2013, which was an interesting experience as a mature student. I just had my third child. So it was quite a difficult experience. I guess if anyone has kids, having kids while going to university is hell. Because turning up to crits and then going home, and also being a mature student. I didn't go to the bar once in my whole time at the RCA. So I must be the only student ever not to go to the bar. I didn't even know where it was in the end. So what I'm going to show you here is a project that the V&A had come up with. The V&A has tried to tap into immersive tech. It doesn't know much about it. It's got a games show on at the moment, but it's kind of trying to understand and work out how to engage with audiences with regards to virtual reality, augmented reality. You're seeing the Tate doing lots of work with regards to augmented work. But the V&A has had small experiences. The Royal Academy has had experiences with regards to VR, and they've worked mainly with artists who don't really understand too much about VR. With regards to virtual reality, my first experiences were working with the National Theatre. So anyone who works, we went and had a tour of the building, but theatre directors think in 360 because they're working on the stage. So my background isn't from film. My background was from graphics and illustration, and that's kind of where I've moved from. And then when I did my MA, I looked about Memory Palace and trying to bring back memories and looking at culture. So the V&A approached me and they said, we'd love to do something with VR. We don't know what to do. The usual thing is they don't have massive budgets, so anything to do with new technology, even though there is a lot of money in technology, with new technology, people are scared to kind of dip lots of money into it. So you'll see small incubators growing within these spaces. So this was the project we started with, which was called Pigment Channel. And there was a huge amount of research. I did about a year's worth of research about colour theory in the virtual space, trying to look at new colours, how to augment colours, how colour could change through your smartphones. So if someone was wearing a certain garment, your garments have codes in them, and then you could advertise for your garments with colour. Huge amount of things. Could you slow down the speed of light with your phone to create new colours? So there was lots of research, and I did this with Winsor & Newton, and that was for about 5 to 6 months. And then I moved into the V&A, kind of hopping from one space to another, and then we come up with Pigment Channel. Pigment Channel was basically to look at how pigment in garments, so you have lake pigments, and lake pigment is the dyeing of fabrics, basically. And channel is how the future of you guys are working, is looking at platforms and working like an MTV world of life. So people are now living this Truman Show world of phones, Instagram, Snapchat, WhatsApp. Yeah, so everyone's sort of living these sort of fake new lives. We don't know what life is real anymore. We're seeing on the internet, my kids are always constantly playing and creating new, I guess, new fake avatars of themselves. So here's our opening slide. So the original concept I came up with, we were using Tilt Brush. I don't know if anyone's used Tilt Brush. It's a software within VR, which Google's created. It's a great tool for kind of building and drawing and being really creative. But I guess the beginning part of Tilt Brush is you can only go so far, and then you need to have techie people involved. My background is more creative. you have to get developers and creative people, especially, so here, for example, we were trying to sculpt faces. We had someone he was doing this in ZBrush, so I don't know if anyone uses ZBrush. So we've got these, then I went and worked with Escape Studios. Escape Studios do films like Pixar, they work with Harry Potter, they did Batman, so they're hugely into VFX. There was a recent VFX festival that they held. So I had a huge realm of people that we had to work with. So we had cloth designers, we had, I guess, computer simulation, cloth simulation, environmental artists. So the team was building up week by week, and I think we ended up with about 15 different people from different departments, from gaming, and these areas I've never really worked with before. So it was quite, I guess, an interesting part in the beginning. It was all, everyone was interested and excited, and we were all kind of working together. So we had people sculpting faces, and they obviously, as creatives, wanted to create their own looks. So we went through lots of iterations of faces. So you can kind of see the top right, he was building the face, and he was using references from photographs, and then we were trying to remodel the face, so make it more of a relevant model to today. So they were using more classical sculptures because we were in the Rodin space. And then he did this crazy hair thing. I don't know what that is on his hair, but he was using, I think that was ZBrush as well. But this was the reference image, and this is what he came up with. So it looks like a bad night out. So it was in it. So digital sculpting, and you're kind of trying to calibrate with these people. This is the style. They don't understand style. They don't understand contemporary fashion. My background's fashion, so I understand the whole process of looking at mood, feeling, understanding that styling is so important to fashion. You know, you see Burberry, you're seeing all these new brands coming through, Tom Ford, all about styling. Fashion is the microscopic part of it. So he was sculpting more than he was sculpting garments. Then we were playing about with the heads and eroding it and digitally eroding it. So this was more the experimental stage. So I kind of let the team of the guys kind of run loose and go a bit crazy. And these are some of them, like I gave them references for Moncler jackets, make them more puffy, make them not puffy, make them shrink. What can we do? Can we do cloth simulation as well? So this was the first reference image. So this was something I created in Tilt Brush quite quickly. So you can paint, I don't know if you do use Tilt Brush, it can't, every 4 or 5 months, there's new sort of brushes that come out. This is quite, I think it was called oil paint or something like that. It's quite an easy brush to do, and you can paint. It's very direct. You can animate in it. It's really it's mega creative. So anyone who wants to be let loose and not have any knowledge of 3D software, VR is for you. It cuts down all the barriers. Within, I'd say, 15 to 20 minutes, you can learn the software, rather than 6 months to a year. We'll do questions after. So that was the first part. Then the second part was the modelling. And then this was where we were modelling the face. We were looking at relics and archiving. So we'd gone to the V&A. So this was all made digitally. There's a new software called Substance Painter, which he was showing off to me. I don't know if you've used Substance Painter, but it's quite amazing. It's literally creates the fabric within milliseconds, and you can just instantly render it. So you don't have to be breaking down bit by bit. Then this was so it went sort of 360 to this sort of final act. So communication point of view is we were kind of went from a tilt brush experience, which I made something quite creative, to something that was more, I guess, relic based. So Daniel Arsham, or if you know some of these artists. And then this was more unique to us, which was the Rodin space. So this was the space. When you're dealing with lots of designers, so we've had an environmental artist. He won a BAFTA for a game called NBA Game Jam or something like that, which I never knew anything about. So he was quite big in the field. He was one of the head VPs for Sony. So he knew what he was talking about. I didn't understand anything that they were all talking about apart from change the colour, change this. So you have to, like, why is the light falling like that? What's the mood? So that was more of my role. So this looked a bit cool, a bit cold. This was a remodelling of a room that used to be Rodin's space. It isn't the V&A space. We were transporting you back to Rodin's actual studio, only from archive photographs. So they had to kind of guess, and they had to find ceiling heights. So there was lots of sort of research. So there was probably about 2 months worth of research from my side, finding all these images, what he did, how he worked, how he functioned, how he sort of operated as an artist. So this was more of the work so allowing the creatives to go further and further, thinking about fabric, how fabric will change in the future. Will fabric start moving on its own? Will it grow? What will happen to our garments in the future? That was my role. My role was thinking about, because of fashion, how will fashion change? And I think that was the most important, and how will the fashion designer be a sort of a role within the system of design. So we're looking at automating fashion. So the fashion designer will probably not exist. It will just be a stylist. And we're seeing Rihanna is going to have her own brand with LVMH, who's obviously a singer, so she has nothing to do with fashion. So there's going to be processes that are going to change as time goes on. So giving lots of reference to the designers, looking at different artists. So you could look at Brancusi, we were looking at Margiela, Jean-Paul Gaultier, looking at plimps. So lots and lots of research, down to the plimps, down to what objects we were going to put in the environment. Again, this was something, so I was making small drawings in tilt brush, so we were trying to have a workflow. So one of the things is, how can we create a workflow that was using VR? And in time you're going to be able to collaborate in VR, so I could have an avatar of someone else and we'll start collaborating in VR. We tried something with China, but the internet wasn't good enough, so they were there, but they were static. So there will be things in time. So I was trying to work in VR, I was sending ideas over to them, they would remodel stuff, then they'd go away, they'd come back, I'd have to wait about a week for them to come back with models. So it's quite a long process, and I'm like, is anything done, without pressurising them and stressing them out? So then this came back with room simulation. So the environmental artist was thinking about, right, how are we going to build the room, how big's the room going to be, how do we have an understanding of space, how wide will the space, how will the sound work, do you want the sound to come from a certain point and spread out? So lots of conversations regarding space. How big will the model be, the height. So all of these kind of conversations happen quite fast. So this was about, after I'd say about 3 to 4 weeks, we were in the point of just getting the room built. And the room to be built was about 2 to 3 weeks after working out the space. So he was now going, right, here's the plinth, this goes here. Even the platform that they were standing on, Rodin had these sort of wooden pallets where in the beginning it looked like a big mattress. So if I allowed them to carry on, they would have just had you standing on a mattress. So they're just building, and they're not too fussed about end goal. So one of the things is constantly you going critical, why is that? So if anyone's analysing this project and wants historical context, they'll go, well, that wasn't there, that is unbelievable, they're not going to be in a spongy environment, Rodin wouldn't work like that. So one of the things as a designer or as an artist, and if you're going to work inclusively or as a group, as collaboration, is who has the roles. And towards the end you'll find out more about what happened with the breakdown of the roles. And group dynamics. So group dynamics is very difficult. Everyone talks about how we're going to collaborate. I went to work for Google, and Google you'll have a team of about 20 people, and a lot of them are doing nothing. No one knows who's doing what, who's the leader. They're talking about the breakdown of hierarchies, so there's no boss, everyone's the boss. No one makes a decision, so no one goes anywhere. So it is quite difficult with dynamics. So when you do anything as a collaboration, like, give each one a role, even if you switch the role. So we did try that, and a few people had the role as the leader, right, I'll take a back seat. You're the main, your knowledge is in this field, right, I want your knowledge. So you make everyone feel comfortable in their fields, and then you'll get the best results, and hopefully move forward. So, but you have to be, someone has to be the main leader. So this moves into stage 2, so he's kind of shaping it, giving shadows, giving, playing with light, putting the human in the space. So how will the human work? And we put the headset on, I had a look around and it was like, okay, great, let's carry on, let's keep moving forward. So then he's still doing modelling, so I've got my guy building this. He's having fun, so I have to let him have his moments, and he's taken the model apart. Some of these were quite arty and interesting, so I kept these, and we animated these and used them for GIF animations. But he was building this human. He was working, so if you ever do sculpture, you work from the inside out. So if you ever model a head or a figure, you tend to think about the muscles and the bone structures. They work the same as if they're building the model, so they work internally outwards. So it's quite interesting to see how they still work. So here's building the objects. So this was a Tom Ford boot that he built, and he kind of glammed it up, and he put this sort of, I guess, sort of metal pixelated plinth. They did, like I wanted to have a sort of modern plinth, so how Brancusi, who you'd have a modernist, and then you've got Rodin, and then we were moving through stages of different, I guess, art historical context to what would a modern person like you, who would move into a studio and potentially work in Rodin space, how would you work? What plinths would you have? So quite important, if you had a piece of art, how would you display it? So if you look at big artists today like Thomas Hausago, Daniel Arsham, people that are embracing the plinth is becoming quite an important part of the art and the sculpture. And here was him playing with metals, garments, so you're looking at Paco Rabanne, we're seeing Tom Ford doing metals as well. J-Lo just wore something, I think, to the Oscars. So there's, all of this is kind of coming forward. So this was constructing the space. So over there was a broken Margiela bag. So here what I wanted to do was imagine how would an artist or a creative, because we're all multidisciplined now, is my background. I've done illustration, I've done fashion design, I've done graphic design, I've done film. We all do everything. So it isn't a man wears many hats. It's kind of, you have to think, right, which field can I work in? Where here it's a creative space. So I'm a creative working in here, and I'm trying to imagine how would a creative, so he might do a big sculpture with a big bag, he might have a huge, like over here we had a fashion figure, then I had my plinths, and I could be carving stuff, and then in this space we were thinking about augmented objects, so it becomes a real playground. And I think when you have a studio, there's mess on the floor, you know, you can imagine Francis Bacon's studio, Lucian Freud, you have bits of concrete, Henry Moore, all these people, they're kind of, it's a working space. So it's a real practical environment. And then this is another shot. So this was one of the shots from the final video, and it took us about 2 weeks of playing with light. So light was quite important because we were trying to get French light. So I wanted to capture this light that we keep talking about in sort of Arles and places like that, where you imagine Van Gogh worked, and people, you know, the French artists, the Impressionists, what sort of light would they have coming through the room? So all of these questions, it was constant, and it was like too blue, too green. So there was minor key changes just to get the styling of the environment and putting the objects, how do we place the object? So it's like a constructivist working, and how does it feel? If I look from above, how does the objects feel? An artist is quite pedantic about how they have their space. So it's like your bedroom, that object's going to be here, this object's, my mess is going to be over there. So this is how we had to work the space. It was too heavy over this space. So there was 5 of us arguing all the time about there's too much over there, there's not enough. Or another problem we had was my object isn't in the front. I want everybody to see the sculpture I've spent 5 weeks making. So there'd be lots of, and at this point we started to get press. So we had people contacting us from ID magazine, Days Confused, and then everybody wanted to be a celebrity within the group. Where's my name? So this is where a bit of group dynamics happens, where, right, my name's not on the V&A poster, yours is. So there's lots of sort of arguments that people will be having, where it's just a project. It's just something that we're all working on together, and this is how collaboration can be quite tough. So at this point, I think we were about 2 weeks before, and everybody wanted to give up. But we got to this point. So it was quite interesting, just from a sort of argumenting point of view. But it's interesting to see how groups work. So here's the space. So the reason I showed this was the picture before had more objects in, and the guy who built a lot of the objects wanted to leave the group because he wasn't going to be published in the magazine, so he took all his objects out. So we then convinced him to put all the objects back in. Everyone became like a student again and started arguing. So it was quite funny how people start functioning within groups. So you become a sort of facilitator within the group. So for me, it was kind of, how do we make sure that everybody stays within control and doesn't go crazy? And I think that is another part of the group, is how do you make sure that everybody stays within the team, everybody keeps happy, everybody doesn't want to kill each other. It's quite important within a big project. When a project's going on for about 3 or 4 months, there's a lot of changes. So this is when we got to the V&A. This is my daughter. So she'd been in VR before, but funnily enough, she still was trying to. So young kids and old people are the best for VR, because the old people don't know what's happening, and young kids, if you touch them, they actually feel like they're being touched. So they actually feel like they're in the space. So it's quite interesting to watch a young kid, because they can allow themselves to actually be encapsulated in the piece, where people like you would go, this is not believable, I'm not convinced, and you'll kind of shift your mind around it. But a young kid will go, like here, I wasn't curating this or directing, someone else took this picture. She actually thought there was these different things happening, and things were moving, objects were changing. So it's quite interesting with audience engagement. In VR, they say kids under 12 shouldn't be able to go into VR, but she's 9 and she was in it, and all the kids wanted to go in it. They were desperate, please, can I go in it? Even kids who were coming around, and I said, yeah, let me in, let them have fun. So they loved it. So here's more people within the space. So I had to kind of navigate people within the space. We didn't have any sort of grid lines coming up, so someone could have walked in and headbutted someone or walked into a wall, but we kind of navigated them, because I didn't like the idea of a grid coming up, it breaks the space. So here's me kind of putting everyone in the middle, saying you've got roughly a 4 to 5. They could have walked, now you've got VR where it's wireless, you could have walked around the whole space. So you could walk 10 metres. If you had a 10-metre space, you could have navigated around. So gaming and places like that, VR is going to be amazing. But the feedback on the headphones, so we had a person doing a sound piece. So I started to develop a sound piece with someone in France who I've worked with before. We did a project for NASA, and it was doing it's like a binaural recording, so I don't know if anyone's done binaural. So binaural is giving this the sense that the person can move around the room, and it gives you a much more immersive experience. So if you've tried binaural, if you haven't, if you go online and look up binaural recording, people can lick your ear, and it feels like they're in your ear. So it's quite an amazing experience. It's really worth trying out binaural. So if you haven't tried it, try it. But as you can see, the Oculus and her hair, so I couldn't get the Oculus over her hair, and the headphones weren't on her ears, and I had the head lecturer from UCL going, she can't hear the binaural recording, it's a waste of my time. So I had another person charge off who hadn't had his sound listened to properly, the headphones weren't great enough, but the show must go on. So this lady here, she was the curator, Susie. She actually cried after seeing the piece. I don't know why, but she loved it and she started crying. So we were like, well, that's the best feedback we could ever get. And then after this, we gave it to Vive. so they're the other headset, and they're taking it to San Francisco, so they're going to be assessing the piece at the moment to see how it, because they just did a piece on Monet, and they may do a piece on Rodin, and so they're looking at it at the moment. So we had another young person, so we had a huge screen, I think it was an 80-inch monitor, to show what was being looked at. And the outcome, it looks quite Ridley Scott-esque, this final piece, but it was quite, the resolution, if it's like the 360 filmmaking wouldn't cut it. I think if you can make it in CGI, the outcome is so much better. Like it was just phenomenal what these guys can do. I was blown away. So this lady cried, so that was kind of amazing feedback. And then the guy on the left, he's the sound guy from, so he was head professor at Stanford. I met him, well, I saw him once, and he didn't speak to me for about 9 months, but I knew he must be super important, because he wouldn't speak. So I met him at RADA, doing a sound piece, and I was like, I've got to speak to that guy, because he seems to know everything. And then I managed to collaborate with him, and we've worked together on 2 or 3 pieces. We might work together in Somerset House this year on another VR piece. But he's developing soundscapes for VR. He's worked with Tate, he's worked with Young Vic, National Theatre, Zoran's his name. But he wasn't happy. But whatever it was, but he liked the visuals. So sound-wise, it wasn't good enough. But it was great to see people loving it and enjoying it. Even the people around the space, you know, when you're talking about what was happening. I met one of the head guys from cancer research. They loved it. They thought it's great for VR, is brilliant for anything to do with medicine. If any of you haven't done VR, it's one area you should all tap into. As a creative, like digital, I work very much analog, and I remember using Photoshop when it was Photoshop 0.1, so right in the beginning, about 20 years ago. And then Illustrator I didn't embrace because I didn't like vectors, but then this was VR. If any of you have not worked in VR, try it. It is an insular experience, but it's a game changer. It's the most important technology, I think, now, forever. Everyone will be working in VR. There won't be computers. So you'll either be using HoloLens or you'll be working in VR. No one will be working on computers in time to come. You'll be working in this. So if you aren't working it, get in it. £100 million being invested this year by the government in VR. So they all know where it's going. So anything to do with training, anything to do with healthcare, anything to do with anything going with the future of design or design thinking, critical thinking is happening in VR. So it's a serious thing to take heed of. And I guess this was my last sort of slide before I show you the film, was the name of the event tonight was Politicians in My Eyes. Obviously we're going through this sort of issue with regards to Brexit, and we had a little chat about it this evening. But I did a talk to Tate about a different side to the future of technology, where I see technology as more of a disruptor. So you have the capabilities now of exhibiting at Tate through smartphones. So I could populate content in Tate Modern or outside. So negative spaces or spaces that the establishment don't have control of is a great way of you using technology like Pokemon Go, and you can say, right, I'm going to have a show, it's going to be at Tate, everyone turns up their smartphones like Silent Disco, and then puts their phone up and you can put content. And that's how you as a disruptor or as an activist against the establishment could be a creative. So it's quite important, and Tate weren't happy when I was talking, because I was talking anti-Tate. But I think it's quite important as a young person, as a creative, is to kind of say, screw the system, I want to be creative and I want to do whatever I want. And these guys here, so when I was doing research for my talk at Tate, I found this group called Def, and they were a proto-punk group. So they were sort of an anti-punk group, and they sound a bit like Block Party. And quite an interesting, they were the first black punk group, and they were the first people to embrace punk. So, you know, it's quite an interesting, so have a look, they were quite interesting guys. And they're doing a documentary about them, funnily enough, that's come out. But one of their songs I thought was quite relevant to now. So it was kind of, I was going to have a big talk about against the system, but I thought you'd be more interested about my V&A talk rather than me being angry and talking about going against the system. But I think as a creative, one of the things I guess I have always thought about is, you know, you budget, there's never any budget for anything. Don't have any barriers. Speak, like I said, I didn't know that guy, I wanted to get in contact with him. Who can you work with? How can you work? Who can you collaborate with? It shouldn't always be about finance and money. If you're an artist or creative, it should be, I want to be creative. And then money will come. People will get interested in what you're doing. And the best projects will always be in the beginning, when the budgets were the least. You'll learn the most. So I guess as a sort of a student, or as a person who doesn't have big budgets, you have the capabilities of going crazy. And I think going crazy is the best way to be creative. And I think only your tutors will agree is, I guess, don't be too shaped by your tutors, even though they've critiqued you. Is, you know, you have your own voice, and I think that's quite important, is to find your own tone of voice. Your tutors are just navigating you. And I think that's kind of an important part to being a sort of a creative with your mentorship. So I think I'm just going to show you a little bit of a video. It's quite a long video, it's about 5 minutes, of what the piece looked like, even though it's not in VR, but it'll give you a rough idea. Hopefully it works, and hopefully it goes full screen. Lights there. Inside of there, I guess the experience is like you can see the garment grow and change, and it was quite interesting. And that's the first sort of main VR piece that I'd ever made. So it's quite kind of I've made smaller pieces, but I guess from this experience it was an interesting to navigate all them people as well, especially computer tech wizards. They're quite hard to keep on board. But thank you.
Can we get maybe a couple of questions if we have any? Yeah.
This is sort of a question about the video. I've like formulated my own opinion on what I think is kind of like obviously it's about fashion, but like the theme of it. Can you tell us like what the actual theme of it is?
Yeah, so that it was trying to make a point about how fashion will change to machine. So the last piece of the series is you had a sculptor who makes work in concrete, then he moves into augmented garments, and then it will be sort of battery farmed garments. So there you're actually in a mainframe in a server, and you're kind of like a voyeur getting into the machine, a little bit like the Matrix, and you're seeing garments being made by the machines. So in time, and I've been developing software where AI now can build all your clothes without you. So there won't be no designers anymore. So like Disney has done this new thing now where you can read a script and it will build the environment that you say. So you might say, we're going to have a Western scenario, and it will build the whole room. And then it will say, right now the lighting needs to be this, and it will change it, and it will do it all 360. And then you can make a film. So it will get rid of animators, it will get rid of filmmakers, it will get rid of scene designers. So in theory, we have to kind of think that this technology will come, and it is coming. And when I showed this stuff, like my ideas to people like Tom Ford, they want to throw me out of the building because half their workforce is going to be gone. Like seamstresses, 3D sewing is already happening, so we're seeing robotics that can suck material and then it sews it. So you're going to have couture made by machines. They'll all be gone. So in theory, you have to kind of imagine that all of these roles will be gone. And where's my role within that system? And that's kind of the comment.
The World Economic Forum in 2017 said that they have like kind of questions of where technology is going and how it's going to affect us being designers or being creative. And says that they said the outcome of the forum was that despite the fact that technology and VR and AI will take over, creativity will always be there.
Yeah.
And there will always be a space for a creative person in every single discipline, not necessarily creative. But my question more or less is about you're doing some work as a freelance, but also you work in the museum. So what's the museum of the future? I mean, like, okay, I'm wondering that this is like the Google Art project.
Yeah.
You go on the screen, you click the button, you zoom in, and you see fantastic work, which is absolutely great. But what is the museum of the future in relation to VR or AI?
Well, the main goal of a museum at the moment is to sell coffee and make you eat cakes.
Because you get a coffee in V&A in particular, it costs a fortune.
Yes, so a lot of their money, so like the Dior exhibition that's on now, which I'm
I think
working,
it's sold out, no?
it's sold out,
Yeah.
and the problem is they make, Dior makes all the money from the show, so So they only make money from books and food and drink. So they need people in them doors to actually start to keep the building open. So when you go to a museum, they've thought about new engagement, they've thought about experiential experiences. So when you go there, is it more tactile? What feedback do you get from the gallery? Young people, like I spoke to the Van Gogh Museum, and we were talking about doing something in VR.
In Amsterdam.
In Amsterdam, yeah. So people are trying, they want things to happen. So young people aren't going to the National Gallery because they go there and they look around and they go, everything's out of date, it's boring. So they try and put new art as a new context with it, but that's still not engaging young people. If I take my kids to Tate, they just go, where are we going to eat? We're going Nando's, what's happening? So in theory, when you take kids to a gallery, is how do you get them to engage or respond to art? I think a museum of the future, these are going to be the massive questions. And I think I took students to the Design Museum to a RAM exhibition, and I was buying my tickets and they were all in front of me, and as I was walking up the stairs, they'd gone up through the exhibition and they were coming down the stairs as I was just going up, and I was like, but you've not seen anything. And it was the interesting thing about that show, it was the first show curated by graphic designers. So usually it would be done by a curator, and it had wayfinding, it had all these interesting things, and they were graphic design students, and they didn't take any of that in until I actually took them round and say, so this is when I talk about a tutor's role, is to help you navigate how to understand. And I think that's quite an important part, is when you go to see art or anything, is when I look at it, how do I engage with it? And I think that's quite an important part. So maybe people having more of a, so you usually have the headphones experience when you go to, and no one takes them because they just want to avoid that person and run past them, or is there going to be a charge? So I think all of these things, when you're talking to young people, is there a fear of charge, any money problems, because they don't want to spend any money on anything. Anything in the gallery context.
Preference.
Yes, they spend their money on certain things. But with regards to galleries, and myself, you'll run past them and you'll go, just leave me alone, I don't want to talk to anyone. And people are now putting their headphones on. So there could be disruptors when you go into the gallery, big alerts. So Rodin and Kennedy are trying to alert you to then go, right, you're now in this room, could someone talk to you? Could it be David Hockney? He starts talking to you about his show, so you feel like you're having a personal experience. There may be more of a personal experience for a curator. I guess because we're having more dialogues with Siri, Alexa, people like that. They're now our new friends.
Yeah.
So our new friends, like the film Her, is you're going to maybe fall in love with Alexa, and Alexa's voice is going to lure you in, and maybe your dialogue is going to be with that. I did a project with the RCA, and we were talking about how to get rid of tutors. So this was one of our conversations.
You know what? That's what it is. That's it. That's it. Yeah. This is gonna.
So it's going to be machine learning. We were talking about that, and what it was more about what is the role of the new tutor, and I think that every role of every position is being questioned. Whether it's a fashion maker or builder, a tutor. What is the role of a tutor? Is the tutor just there to go, okay, your work, you look at these, gives you advice? Well, a machine can do that. Okay, so what's the role of a tutor? Because a lot of tutors that I have seen, they go on YouTube and learn this. Well, anyone could have told you that. So any young person could say, well, I could have learned that. So I'm
just looking.
Yeah, so it depends on the tutor and their knowledge and the conversation. So these are all big dialogues that we have. And that's the same role with academia, within museums, is what is the role of a museum to you, and how is the conversation going to be more relevant? I think relevance is quite, because the museums are run by elitist people who have no sort of understanding of the young people and young culture, and you go to, why do you want to go to a gallery? What's the point?
But it's the same thing with education at the same time, because your university will have like a vice chancellor or someone that leading the university, and they have to maintain the business healthy.
Yeah.
And then it comes down to us to maintain like this.
The morale.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You mentioned on your last slide about death.
Yes.
And I'm looking Stacy now, because Stacy's research is on digital death. So I would like to know more about this kind of the death and the overall idea of like how do you see, maybe Stacy can maybe can form this question a bit better than me.
Well, you talked about the disruption of the kind of post-punk,
Yeah.
and I'm interested in possibly how that level of disruption could extend to kind of the AI and the kind of system, and how kind of the breakdowns or the errors could be used by artists of the future to kind of push against that system of we're all being replaced by the AI. So how can we kind of infiltrate and sort of extend
Before
that
you
system?
answer it also, I would also want to think at the back of your head, because one of the comments you made when we should talk about this, it was about that it was the first black male punk group, or, yeah. So I want you to somehow to bring this kind of diversity with the answer.
That's a
We
terrible
spoke-
question.
How do you answer this? Let's see.
No, so well, I guess there's a few strands. So first of all is, I guess, painting had the death of painting, the death of image making, photography came in. So there'll be the death of everything. There will be people rage against the machine. So I did a talk at Convergence, which was anti-digital. So how do we stick our finger up to digital and say, no, we don't want to be recorded, we don't want Facebook to have our data. How do we screw basically all of these camps, shut down Facebook, shut down everything. And even though we've had people speaking up about, Cambridge Analytica and people like that, saying about how they're data harvesting, people still are using Facebook, people are still using Instagram. So the tone of voice isn't really coming from young people enough. You're not being activist enough. You're not fighting against the machine enough. And I think being anti or bringing a death to a system is quite important. Where you could say, how do we create the death of digital? Is like there is a sort of rise of analog photography. So you're seeing photographers now using 35mm cameras. So
Well, why? Is it a bit of nostalgia? Or?
it is nostalgia, and it is that when I went to university, we had dark rooms, we did colour photography, we learnt about pinhole cameras, where you've had digital
Chemicals,
cameras,
learning how to
chemicals,
use,
and screen printing and things like this. And then I guess students are coming through now who are digital native, and then they go, oh, well, what is this different look that I can't get? So if I wanted a colour reversive photograph, I go, how does he capture that?
Why
Oh,
Photoshop
he's
doesn't
using-
give that to me?
yeah, so Photoshop can create that thing, but right, I want to make something that's true. So it's, do I buy a medium format camera? And do I learn from that? We learn what happens with, why there are layers in Photoshop, why different things, what the different tools are.
You mentioned at the beginning, like you started with Photoshop 1.0. I
Yeah.
started with, I don't know, maybe we're the same age, but I started with Photoshop 3.0,
Oh,
right?
right.
And now it's like 20, whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. So CS, whatever. So the thing is that like we learned that we understand the layers because we went through the process of knowing what the layer is.
Yes.
And then my question is that where it comes to an end, where that comes to the end of the reality. Because the beginning of the talk you said like this life is not real.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the boundaries there? How we are defining what is real or not?
Well, an interesting thing is like I went to a talk and we were doing the BFI. We were doing a beatboxer who wanted to have a Duchampian experience where he was going to have an AI version of himself beatboxing. So he beatboxed with a beatbox machine who learned how to beatbox. So the machine was learning and learning, and the machine became better than him, almost like this chess match experience. So it was kind of a great thing, but then the interesting thing is we all went to the pub afterwards and started drinking, and that's where there's no digital, you're just having a chat. So in theory, that sort of real point is where people are off their phones and you're going out into the woods, because they were talking about how the machines will do everything. And I think in Germany they were talking a lot about this, where machines will do all the boring jobs and we will go and live in the forests and have fun and just enjoy ourselves, and there'll be an ecosystem that
Yep.
just we live in, and the machines are going to do it all.
Maybe.
But that's kind of a utopian.
Maybe it is, but you know what, just to close as well at like the difference between having a machine, right, or before go to the pub, is that before you go to the pub, if you send someone a text or you say something to someone, you can always delete that.
Yes.
When you go to the pub, you are done. Whatever you say after a couple of drinks, that will stay for you with you, and
Well,
that's it.
as
Depends on how many
long as
drinks.
you're not both drunk, if you're not recording it. And there's lots of clubs, like in Berlin, where you can't bring phones in. So I think it's kind of, people are trying to say, let's step away from technology. Like we went out, clubbing and things like that, and that's not documented, thank God.
Thanks God.
Where, you know, you guys go out and someone can record it, and if you watch Black Mirror is kind of a bit of a scary thing to watch, where you can go, wow, where could the future go? And I think that's an interesting thing that all of you, when I did my MA, one of the things that we were talking about is, in the last part of my second year, was not really working, was more critical thinking. And this is where this kind of came from, is this critical thinking of creating things that aren't real and trying to imagine the impossible. And I think that is what your roles are now, is try and think 10 years ahead of yourself and go, right, let me imagine what possible things could be made. And if you look at like the life cycles of Instagram, the journeys that they try and create to create an app, is you guys, what could you build, and not just think about what job can I fill, what job can I create. And I think young people are much more entrepreneurial now. I think everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. It's quite scary because you see everybody's a creative director and they're still at university. So I think the lines are not quite blurry at the moment of who has the role of what. I had students who are creative directors, and I'm like, but you're my student. You know, you haven't even worked in the
They're
industry.
more qualified somehow on social media than you are.
Yes, so I think on the internet is a voice, and people say fake it till you make it, which is another interesting area. So I think, you know, you can go out there. I think the best thing is make good work, and the good work will always rise above any influencer, anything that's fake. Good work always talks, and I think that's sort of an end.
Great, Patrick. Nice, great. Thank
All
you.
right.